What does a conductor do? If you go to a concert and you see somebody waving around a stick like this, what you're seeing is the very last finished product, at least on the artistic side, of what a conductor really does. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And even though that's just the finished product, perhaps we should start there. Imagine you're at an orchestra concert and you see over 100 musicians sitting on a stage. How do they start the piece of music? Does the snare drum player in the back say, and a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3, 4? I have nothing in particular against starting a piece that way, but in classical music, most of the time, that is not done. So if we're not going to do that, we're going to have to designate somebody to start us off with a cue. A non-verbal gesture that tells us when we can start playing together. Now, if the cue is coming from one of the performing musicians, they might do it with a breath and a nod of their head like this. Historically, it was very common for one of the players, especially a keyboard player in the middle, to be surrounded by other musicians and to give gestures like that. But alternatively, we could have a conductor. Conducting gestures are designed to communicate ideas to you without using any words at all. So I'll give you a few examples. I'll show you a gesture, and I bet that intuitively you can guess what I'm trying to tell you. Imagine you're playing music and then you see me in front of you doing this. Were you able to guess that I was showing you to play softer? How about if you were to see me with a conducting pattern like this, and then all of a sudden it changed to something like this? I just showed you to start playing staccato, or short detached notes. And how about if we're playing a piece of music and then all of a sudden you see this? Could you guess that I was communicating with you to tell you to stop? I can use all of these gestures and many, many more to communicate with musicians in real time and without using any words at all. Now, backing up from the performance, we've got to think about our rehearsals. Now again, imagine you've got over 100 musicians sitting together in a room playing music. If you plan on paying them in anything other than pizza, it's going to start to get pretty expensive. If you're enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you took a moment to go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. So one of the jobs of the conductor is to make sure that the rehearsal runs as efficiently and as smoothly as possible. The conductor has to have a plan to maximize every single minute of rehearsal time. Seriously, large professional ensembles often get so little rehearsal time that if you're a composer lucky enough to get your music played by an orchestra, for example, there's a running joke about getting 15 minutes to rehearse a 20-minute piece of music. And speaking of efficiency, let's talk about artistic choices. Imagine I was part of a rock band or string quartet. In other words, an ensemble small enough to fit in a Honda CR-V. Now, if one of the players says, hey, can we all look at this section of music and I think we should play it a little bit softer here. Well, the rest of the group can talk to me about that decision and we can decide together if that's something that we all like. But when I have a large group of musicians, that could become very time-consuming. And this next part to some people is one of the most upsetting parts of what conductors do. Simply put, the conductor is responsible for making the majority of the artistic decisions in a piece of music. The conductor studies from a score that has often hundreds of pages of music, each with dozens of lines and each line representing a different instrument or a different instrumental section. It's an extraordinary amount of information to process. And the conductor has to look at the big picture, and they have to make all of the artistic decisions that the composer did not make. It might say forte in the piece of music, but how loud is forte enough? And if it's an old piece of music, it won't say forte at all. This part of the conductor's job saves perhaps the most amount of time, but it also might make some performing musicians pretty miserable. If you're looking at a decent orchestra, you have a whole bunch of musicians who've spent years and years, their entire lifetimes, practicing, studying, working hard, learning how to be artists and make artistic choices. And now they're so fortunate because they're one of the very few people who's actually getting paid full-time to do what they love. They're one of the few people who's made it into one of these professional orchestras. But on the other hand, all of that learning and studying and developing and how to make artistic choices, well, most of those artistic choices will now be made for them. I've seen some talks from the conductor Benjamin Zander where he points out how much happier chamber musicians are, so musicians who play in a small group, than musicians who play in large groups. And he points that to the fact that those chamber musicians are getting to make the vast majority of their own artistic decisions. Now, I should briefly mention that conductors also do a lot of administrative work, anything from programming which pieces are going to be on a concert to scheduling to working with donors. I should also point out that there are some orchestras that have no conductors. Groups like the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra or Delirium Musicum, who I've been lucky enough to feature on my page. From my own experience, conducting is one of the most wonderful and at first most terrifying things you'll ever get to experience. You get to move your body and then music comes out. It's pretty fantastic. It's also extremely competitive. Only a handful of people are able to make full-time careers out of it. And many of those people struggle with the work-life balance and the demands of that job. If you ever have the opportunity to conduct a large ensemble, would you take it? Or would it be too intimidating for you? Let me know what you think in the comments.